According to OHCHR data, since the 4th of July, Israelis carried out 24 strikes on schools where displaced people were located. As a result of this, at least 274 people have died.
This much we do know and must be acknowledged. Hamas continues to gather and continues to operate out of schools with no regard for the well-being of civilians.
The problem is that, because of the pandering to Israel from our Western colleagues, the Council still has unfortunately not been able to take a requisite reaction to the escalation of the crisis in the Middle East.
Israel has a right to pursue Hamas. Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does that matters. We continue to support the United Nations' vital, albeit difficult to implement, humanitarian efforts in Gaza. The United States is deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties following the August 10th strike by the IDF on the compound in Gaza that included a school and a mosque sheltering desperate, displaced people, including women and children. We have raised our concerns with Israel, and while they indicated they were targeting senior officials from Hamas and Palestinian Jihad, they have an obligation to do everything possible under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. We mourn every civilian lost in this horrific incident and in this conflict. But this much we do know and must be acknowledged. Hamas continues to gather and continues to operate out of schools with no regard for the well-being of civilians. Israel has a right to pursue Hamas. Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does that matters. We've said repeatedly and consistently that Israel must take measures to minimize civilian harm. Colleagues, I cannot stress enough President Biden's view that it is time to bring immediate relief to the long-suffering people in Gaza and the long-suffering hostages and their families. The best way to do that is a ceasefire in Gaza with a hostage deal. The United States, alongside Qatar and Egypt, has worked tirelessly for months to forge the framework agreement on the table, with only the details of implementations to be concluded. A framework based on the principles endorsed by this Council in Resolution 2735. Simply put, the deal needs to get done now. Now. As President Biden emphasized in a statement last week with leaders of Qatar and Egypt, and I quote, "There is no further time to waste nor excuses from any party for further delay. It is time to release the hostages, begin the ceasefire, and implement this agreement," unquote. We've called on both sides to resume urgent discussion on Thursday, August 15th, in Doha or Cairo to close all remaining gaps and commence implementation of the deal without further delay. As mediators, we are prepared to present a final bridging proposal, one that resolves the remaining implementation issues in a manner that meets the expectations of all parties. Now we're once again in a moment of heightened threat. Consequently, the United States has taken needed precautionary steps, including moving an aircraft carrier group and additional air assets to the region so that should the situation arise again, we are prepared to defend Israel and U.S. military personnel in the region against any threats. But let me be clear, our deployment of additional military assets are not a prediction of what is to come.
The notion that the situation in Gaza and in the region as a whole continues to drastically deteriorate has, unfortunately, already become routine and does not get across the horrors and the suffering that the civilians in Gaza have to face every day, including elderly people, women and children. Expecting our Western, primarily American colleagues in cahoots with Israel to express any compassion to Palestinians is pointless. Therefore, it's important to regularly bring the truth about what's happening in Gaza to the Security Council platform and to the international community. We were extremely shaken by the Israeli strike on the Al Tabin school in Gaza. At the time, more than 2,000 refugees were sheltering there. More than 100 people died and tens were injured. Many of the victims were women and children. We express our sincere condolences to the families of those who died, and we wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. We'd recall our consistent position of principle about the need for strict compliance with the norms of international humanitarian law. We call on Western Jerusalem to refrain from any attacks on civilian objects. There can be no justification for this kind of action. Unfortunately, what happened in Al Tabin can't be seen as a one-off, or indeed some awful criminal misstep. As has already been said today, only in the last 10 days alone, 13 centres in Gaza where IDPs were sheltering have been bombed. According to OHCHR data, since the 4th of July, Israelis carried out 24 strikes on schools where displaced people were located. As a result of this, at least 274 people have died. There's a growing conclusion that what is happening is not anything else than a deliberate choice by the Israeli leadership. Condemnation of specific acts of Western Jerusalem and calls for restraint will not work. The problem runs much deeper. The problem is that, because of the pandering to Israel from our Western colleagues, the Council still has unfortunately not been able to take a requisite reaction to the escalation of the crisis in the Middle East. Essentially, the Security Council reminds us more and more of a passive and powerless bystander who can only report a worsening degradation of the situation and ritually express on this their concern. I'll say more. 14 members of the Security Council are inherently being held hostage by the US, who blocks any action towards an immediate ceasefire. On the 10th of June, more than 2 months ago, the Council adopted its most recent product on Gaza. Then, its American sponsors pressed members of the Security Council to give it the green light as soon as possible, claiming that upon it hung the fate of the deal between Hamas and Israel on a ceasefire. Russia, I will recall, abstained at that time because we had the most serious doubts regarding the feasibility of this resolution. As time has shown, all of these doubts have been confirmed. Now, our Western colleagues prefer not to think about this, but Resolution 2735 contained 3 phases with extremely ambitious plans, from a comprehensive ceasefire to the start of a full-scale reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Not a single one of these phases has materialized. Now, they all look absolutely surrealistic. And unfortunately, the Security Council signed up to this surrealism. But what worse than anything, it signed up on a blatant lie, complaining in the first operative paragraph that Israel agreed to the proposed conditions in the deal. Its representatives on many occasions, including in this room, said directly that they did not agree to it. Moreover, all the rhetoric of the Israeli officials shows that Israel, in principle, does not intend to stop its military operation, whatever the position of the Security Council may be. Inter alia, Israeli Minister of Finance, Smotrich, called the deal a capitulation to Yahya Sinwar, and the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, directly said that there will not be an end to this war. So what then result came from, to quote our American colleagues, their active diplomacy on the ground to bring parties to agreement which the Security Council should not interfere with? Even the expression "the mountain has given birth to a mouse" would be an understatement. We don't know about any progress. Moreover, since the adoption of Resolution 2735, the only anti-result is a blatant, provocative murder of the main negotiator of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, former Palestinian Prime Minister, during his visit to Tehran. Now the whole world is sitting anxiously fearing a new escalation in the region. And the United States of America, who still even have not lifted a finger on this, as calling to say that Hamas should participate in negotiations on August the 15th, as if everything only depended on Hamas.